What happens when America's sweetheart walks straight into the lion's den and refuses to be intimidated? Today, we're diving into one of the most talked about and shocking confrontations in daytime television history, the moment when Dolly Parton's legendary Southern charm collided head-on with Joy Behar's razor-sharp tongue. What unfolded wasn't just an awkward interview or a tense exchange. It became a powerful story about respect, personal boundaries, and what happens when someone finally decides they've had enough of being talked down to. Make sure you subscribe and let me know in the comments if you think Dolly handled this the right way. The View's studio buzzed with its usual pre-show energy as cameras rolled and the audience settled into their seats. Producers whispered into headsets, stage lights glowed warmly, everything appeared normal routine even, but beneath the polished surface, something felt different that day. Dolly Parton took her seat in the guest chair, her signature blonde hair piled high, her sequin jacket catching the studio lights with every small movement. She looked exactly like Dolly Parton, confident, glamorous, unapologetically herself. A woman who had spent more than 5 decades in the public eye, surviving trends, criticism, and countless attempts to put her into a box. She had faced it all before, or so it seemed. Across from her sat Joy Behar, leaning slightly forward, eyes sharp, lips curled into a smile that didn't quite reach them. Anyone familiar with the show recognized that expression immediately. It was the look Joy wore when she was about to press someone hard. Joy opened with what sounded like a harmless question, but the edge was unmistakable. "You've been making music for, 50 years now?" Joy said, tilting her head. "Don't you think it might be time to update that look? I mean, the big hair, the sequins. It's very 1970s. A few nervous chuckles rippled through the audience. Dolly smiled, warm and practiced, but there was a subtle change in her eyes, a quiet sharpening, the kind that comes from a woman who knows exactly who she is. "Well, honey," Dolly replied calmly, her Tennessee drawl smooth and steady, "I've always believed that if something works, why fix it? My fans seem to love me just the way I am. That should have been the end of it." A graceful answer, a clear boundary, but Joy wasn't finished. Leaning forward, her tone turning more pointed, Joy pressed on. "But don't you think you're setting a bad example for young women? All the emphasis on appearance. The plastic surgery, the costumes. That's not exactly feminist, is it?" The air in the studio shifted instantly. Whoopi Goldberg shot Joy a warning look. Sarah Haynes shifted in her seat, clearly uncomfortable. One of the producers subtly raised a hand, signaling caution. But Joy waved past all of it, emboldened, sensing blood in the water. Before anyone else could intervene, Joy continued, "I'm serious, Dolly. You've built your entire brand on looking like a cartoon character. Don't you think that's a bit shallow for someone who claims to be a serious artist?" The audience gasped softly. This was no longer playful banter. This was personal. Dolly didn't respond right away. Her fingers drummed once on her knee, a small, almost imperceptible movement. But for those who knew her well, it was a tell. Dolly Parton was choosing her words carefully, very carefully. When she finally spoke, her voice was still gentle, but there was steel beneath it. "Joy, darling," she said, meeting Joy's gaze directly, "I've never claimed to be anything other than exactly what I am." The room went quiet. "I write my own songs," Dolly continued. "I run my own businesses. I've employed thousands of people over the years. I've funded schools, libraries, and literacy programs. And I've done it all without asking anyone's permission to look the way I do." Applause broke out across the studio. Dolly didn't raise her voice. She didn't insult Joy. She didn't flinch. "If that's not serious enough for you," she added calmly, "then I reckon that says more about you than it does about me." The audience erupted again, louder this time. Joy forced a laugh, but it didn't land. The moment had shifted. Control had slipped from her grasp. "Oh, please, Dolly." Joy scoffed, attempting to regain footing. "You really expect people to believe that the image doesn't matter?" Dolly inhaled slowly, then leaned forward just slightly, mirroring Joy's posture for the first time. "Image matters when you let it define your worth," Dolly said. "Mine never has. I decide who I am, not critics, not commentators, and certainly not someone trying to shame me for being successful on my own terms." Silence. For a brief moment, no one spoke. Not the hosts, not the audience. Even Joy seemed unsure how to proceed. Then Dolly stood up. She smiled politely, nodded to Whoopi and the others, and said simply, "I think that's enough for me today. Thank you for having me." And with that, she walked off the set. The audience stood in a spontaneous standing ovation as the cameras scrambled to adjust. Joy sat frozen, stunned. The producers rushed to cut to commercial. In that moment, Dolly Parton didn't just defend her image, she redefined the conversation. It wasn't about hair, makeup, or sequins. It was about dignity. And sometimes, the strongest response isn't shouting back, it's knowing when to stand up, walk away, and let your legacy speak for itself. You can't seriously sit there and tell me that your success isn't built on playing into male fantasies about what a woman should look like. Joy Behar's voice cut through the studio like a blade. The words landed hard, sharp enough to make several audience members visibly stiffen in their seats. She didn't pause, didn't soften the blow, didn't give anyone time to intervene. "You're basically a Barbie doll with a guitar." A collective gasp rippled through the room. Before Dolly could respond, Whoopi Goldberg leaned forward, her tone firm and unmistakably authoritative. "Joy, I think we should move on." For a brief moment it seemed like the show might regain control. Producers shifted in relief, cameras adjusted, the tension hovered, but there was still a chance to redirect. But then Dolly spoke. "No, it's all right, Whoopi," she said gently. Her voice was still sweet, still calm, but now there was something else beneath it, a quiet steel, the kind that comes from a woman who has finally decided she will not be talked over or dismissed. "I think Joy has something she needs to get off her chest." Dolly turned her full attention toward Joy, her eyes steady, her posture relaxed but grounded. "Go ahead, honey," she added softly. "Tell me what you really think about me." The invitation seemed to energize Joy. For a split second, she looked almost gleeful, like someone who had just been handed permission to say what they'd been waiting to say all along. "Fine," Joy said. "I think you're a smart woman who spent her whole career dumbing herself down to appeal to men. I think this whole cutacy, helpless Southern Belle act is an insult to women who actually fought for real equality. And I think it's about time someone finally called you out on it." The studio went dead silent. No applause, no murmurs, no nervous laughter. Even the camera operators seemed to freeze, unsure whether to zoom in or pull back. Every eye in the room was locked on Dolly Parton. Dolly didn't move. She sat perfectly still, hands folded in her lap, her familiar smile still in place. But something fundamental had shifted. Her posture straightened slightly. The warmth remained, but now it was paired with resolve. After a long moment, she spoke. "Well," Dolly said softly, "that's certainly an opinion you're entitled to have, Joy." Her tone was polite, measured, almost generous. Then she tilted her head just slightly and continued. "But let me ask you something." The change in the room was immediate. "How many literacy programs have you started?" Dolly asked calmly. "How many children have you put through college? How many hospitals have you helped fund?" Joy's expression flickered, just for a moment. A flash of uncertainty crossed her face, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "That's not the point I was making," Joy said sharply. "Oh," Dolly replied, her voice growing stronger, clearer, "but it is exactly the point." She leaned forward now, not aggressively, but with intention. "You see," Dolly continued, "while you've been sitting behind this desk all these years, tearing other women down, I've been out there building women up." The audience stirred. "My imagination library has given away over 100 million books to children who might never have owned a book in their lives otherwise," Dolly said. "I've helped kids learn to read before they ever set foot in a classroom." Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Dolly kept going. "I've created thousands of jobs, most of them for women, in places where opportunities were scarce. I've funded hospitals. I've supported education. I've mentored young female artists who were told they didn't belong in this business." Dolly's voice never rose. She didn't shout. She didn't insult. She didn't need to. "And I've done all of that," she said, "without asking permission to look the way I look, sound the way I sound, or be the kind of woman that makes people like you uncomfortable." The audience broke into applause, slow at first, then building, growing louder with every second. Joy tried to interrupt, "But that doesn't erase the message, it does," Dolly said gently but firmly, holding up one finger. The room went quiet again, "because the message I've lived by is simple. Women don't owe anyone a version of themselves that fits someone else's idea of serious." She smiled. This time, not for the cameras. Some women fight with speeches. Dolly continued. Some fight with laws. And some of us fight by building something that lasts. She leaned back slightly, her voice softening again. But none of that seems to matter to you, she said, because you don't like my hair. There it was. The line hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Joy didn't respond right away. She looked down at her notes, then back up, searching for footing that was no longer there. The audience erupted. Applause, cheers, even a few standing. Whoopi nodded quietly. Sarah Haynes looked visibly relieved. The producers exchanged looks of disbelief. Dolly sat back in her chair, composed. Dignified, unshaken. In that moment, it was no longer about image or feminism or television drama. It was about impact, and Dolly Parton had just reminded everyone in the room, and everyone watching at home, that power doesn't always look the way critics expect it to. Sometimes it looks like a woman who knows exactly who she is, and refuses to apologize for it. The audience was completely captivated now. What had begun as an uncomfortable interview had transformed into something far more intense, something raw and unscripted. You could feel it in the room. Every breath, every blink, every subtle shift in posture carried weight. This was no longer daytime television as usual. This was a moment. Joy opened her mouth to respond, clearly sensing that she needed to regain control before it slipped away entirely. But before a single word could escape, Dolly raised one perfectly manicured hand. "I'm not finished, sweetheart." The words were calm but unmistakably final. The studio froze. "You want to talk about feminism?" Dolly continued, her voice steady, confident, and unwavering. "Real feminism is about women supporting other women, not tearing them down just because they make different choices than you do." A murmur of approval rippled through the audience. Real feminism, she went on, is about judging women by their actions, not by their appearance, and real feminism is about having the courage to be exactly who you are, regardless of what bitter, judgmental people might say about you. Joy's face was flushing red now. The composure she was known for, the sharp wit, the smug confidence, was beginning to crack. Her jaw tightened, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I am not bitter." Joy snapped. "Aren't you?" Dolly asked quietly. The softness in her tone somehow made the question sharper. "Because from where I'm sitting," Dolly continued, "you seem awfully angry at a woman you've never met personally, for choices that don't affect you in any way whatsoever. That sounds pretty bitter to me." A collective intake of breath swept through the room. The other hosts watched the exchange like a tennis match, their heads turning back and forth between the two women. Whoopi leaned back slightly, eyes wide but thoughtful. Sarah Haynes clasped her hands together. No one dared interrupt. The audience was on the edge of their seats, sensing that something unprecedented was happening, that she was losing the narrative. Joy tried desperately to steer the conversation back to safer ground. "Look, Dolly," she said, forcing a measured tone, "I'm not trying to attack you personally. I'm just saying that your image sends the wrong message." "No, Joy," Dolly interrupted, and there was nothing soft about her voice now. "You are attacking me personally," Dolly said firmly. "You've been attacking me from the moment I sat down." She began counting on her fingers. "You've called me a cartoon character. You've compared me to a Barbie doll. You've accused me of setting a bad example for women. All because I choose to wear sequins and tease my hair." Her gaze locked onto Joy's. "So tell me," Dolly asked, "what message does that send to young women watching you right now?" Joy's mouth opened, then closed. She looked, for the first time, genuinely stunned, like someone who had walked confidently into a trap without realizing it was there. Her eyes darted briefly toward the other hosts, as if searching for backup that didn't come. The studio audience was dead silent, hanging on every word. You could practically feel the electricity crackling in the air. I was just trying to have a discussion about," Joy stammered. "A discussion?" Dolly repeated, her eyebrows lifted in genuine surprise. "Honey," Dolly said, shaking her head slightly. "Discussions involve two people talking respectfully to each other. What you've been doing is called an attack. There's a difference. A pause, though," she added calmly. "I can see how you might get confused, since attacking seems to be your specialty." Gasps echoed across the studio. Whoopi leaned forward again, sensing the temperature had reached critical mass. "Ladies," she said carefully, "maybe we should take a commercial break." "No," Joy snapped sharply, her pride clearly wounded now. The interruption only seemed to fuel her frustration. She turned back to Dolly, her voice raised, edges fraying. "You can sit there and act all high and mighty," Joy said, "but the fact remains that your whole career has been built on perpetuating outdated stereotypes about women. You giggle, you bat your eyelashes, you play dumb." The accusation hung in the air. Dolly didn't flinch. Instead, she smiled, a slow, knowing smile that held no humor. "Let me tell you something, Joy," Dolly said evenly. "There's a difference between being playful and being powerless, and I've never been powerless a day in my life." Applause erupted before she could continue. "I choose kindness," Dolly said. "I choose warmth, and yes, sometimes I choose humor. That doesn't make me weak. It makes me strategic." Joy shook her head, visibly rattled. "You think strength has to look like anger," Dolly went on. "You think intelligence has to sound mean, and you think empowerment only counts if it looks exactly like yours." She leaned forward just slightly. "But empowerment comes in many forms. Mine just happens to come with big hair." The audience broke into laughter and applause, some people standing now. Dolly straightened, her voice steady once more. "And if young women are watching this right now," she said, "I hope they see a woman who refuses to be shamed for being herself. I hope they see that you don't have to tear someone else down to prove your own worth." Joy sat back, silent. For the first time since the segment began, she had nothing left to say. The cameras lingered on Dolly, calm, composed, unshaken, before slowly pulling back to reveal the stunned faces of the hosts and the audience. This wasn't just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. And in that moment, Dolly Parton didn't just defend herself. She exposed the difference between criticism and cruelty, between feminism and bitterness, between strength that shouts and strength that stands its ground. And everyone watching knew it. "That's who I am," Dolly said calmly, "a country girl who loves music and loves people." Her voice didn't waver. It didn't need to. "What's not authentic," she continued, "is sitting behind a desk throwing stones at other women simply because their choices make you uncomfortable." A hush swept over the studio. The other hosts watched the exchange with a mix of fascination and growing concern. Sarah Haynes looked like she wanted to crawl under the table and disappear entirely. Sunny Hostin had picked up her pen and was quietly taking notes, her expression serious, already calculating how this moment would be addressed later, if it could be addressed at all. Joy, however, wasn't backing down. "You can dress it up however you want," Joy said, her voice tight, "but you're still selling an image that tells women they need to look a certain way to succeed." "No, Joy," Dolly replied firmly, "that's what you're doing." The shift was unmistakable now. Dolly wasn't just defending herself, she was reframing the entire argument. "You're telling women that if they choose to embrace their femininity," Dolly went on, "if they choose to wear makeup, pretty clothes, and style their hair, then they're somehow less than." She paused, letting the words sink in. "You're saying that to be taken seriously, women have to look and act like men." Her eyes met Joy's directly. "That's not feminism," Dolly said. "That's just another kind of prison." A murmur of agreement rippled through the audience, growing louder by the second. Heads nodded. A few people clapped softly before stopping themselves, unsure if applause was even appropriate in a moment this intense. Joy could feel it. Whatever support she might have had was slipping away. "That's not what I'm saying at all," Joy protested, but her voice lacked the confidence it once had. The sharp edge was gone, replaced by strain. "Isn't it?" Dolly pressed gently, but relentlessly, "because from what I've heard so far, you seem to think that any woman who chooses traditional femininity is somehow betraying the cause." She tilted her head slightly. "So tell me, Joy, what gives you the right to decide how other women should present themselves?" Joy opened her mouth to respond, but Dolly wasn't finished, and while we're talking about authenticity, Dolly continued, "let's talk about what's really happening here." The studio was so quiet now that even the soft hum of the lights seemed loud. "You invited me on this show," Dolly said, "supposedly to promote my new album and talk about my charity work." She gestured subtly with her hand. "But from the moment I sat down, you've done nothing but attack my appearance, my personal choices, and my character." Her voice hardened, not angry, but unmistakably firm. "Is that what you call professional journalism?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Joy shifted uncomfortably in her chair. For the first time since the segment began, she looked genuinely unsure of herself. Her confidence had turned into defensiveness, her posture slightly collapsed inward. "I was just trying to ask tough questions," Joy said weakly. "Tough questions," Dolly repeated, incredulous. She shook her head slowly. "Now, Joy." Dolly said, "A tough question would be asking me about the challenges facing rural education. A tough question would be asking about the complexities of running businesses in the entertainment industry. Tough questions are about policy, about substance, about things that actually matter." The audience leaned forward collectively, attacking a woman's appearance. Dolly continued, and calling her a cartoon character. "That's not journalism." She paused. "It's bullying." You could hear a pin drop. Even the cameraman seemed frozen in place, afraid to miss a single second of what was unfolding. This was no longer television. It was a reckoning happening live with nowhere to hide. Joy tried one last time to regain control. "Look, Dolly," she said, attempting a calmer tone. "I think you're misunderstanding my intentions." "No." Dolly cut her off smoothly. "I understand your intentions perfectly." Her words were precise. Measured, devastating. "Your intention was to embarrass me on national television." Dolly said, "Your intention was to try to make me look foolish so that you could feel superior." Joy blinked rapidly. "Your intention," Dolly continued, "was never to have a meaningful conversation. It was to score points at my expense." The audience shifted, restless now, the tension almost unbearable. "But here's the thing," Dolly said, her voice softening just slightly. "I've spent my entire life being underestimated. I've been laughed at, dismissed, and reduced to my appearance more times than I can count." She smiled faintly, and every single time I kept going. She leaned forward just a bit. "I didn't succeed because of how I look," Dolly said. "I succeeded because I work hard, I keep my word, and I care about people." Her eyes scanned the audience. "And if young women are watching this right now," she added, "I hope they learn that there's more than one way to be strong. You don't have to harden yourself to be respected. You don't have to tear someone else down to prove you belong." Joy sat silently, her lips pressed together, her usual sharp retorts nowhere to be found. Dolly straightened in her chair, her composure fully restored. "I came here in good faith," she said, "and I will always stand up for myself when that faith is abused." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was reverent. Everyone in that studio, hosts, audience, crew, knew they had just witnessed something rare. Not a shouting match, not a scandal, but a moment where power quietly shifted from cruelty to clarity. Dolly Parton hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't insulted anyone. She had simply told the truth, and let it stand on its own. And in doing so, she didn't just defend herself. She drew a line.